Well, hey everybody, how are ya? My name is Megan Smith, and I'm going to walk you through some ideas and some lesson examples to help you teach the JCPS Let's Eat unit for level 1 students. Now, I've got a little warning before you get into this webinar. Number one, these lessons are not perfect, and they are not the only way to teach this topic. You're going to have to find out what's best for you and decide and make some switches that may help fit these lessons to your school and your students. You know your students, you know your classroom better than I do. So again, these are just ideas to get you going. They're just lessons to get a little bit of inspiration and maybe some authentic resources that you can apply to this unit. I know if you're anything like me, lesson planning is a chore. It is a lot of work to come up with great lessons for students and to get them engaged and get them connected to the topics. And I felt like as soon as I taught one topic, I was already moving on to the next one, and I didn't even have time to reflect and make the changes that I wanted to. And before I knew it, I was teaching that topic again. So again, today's webinar is really just to share some ideas and to help you along in this lesson planning process. And hopefully I've got some things today that will be exciting and new for you. So let's get started. This 1B unit, Let's Eat, probably is going to target a novice high or an intermediate low proficiency. Toward the end of level 1, most of my students were novice high and they were breaking into that intermediate low, but not quite there yet. And they probably won't be there right away on this topic, since the topic of food is probably new. You haven't yet taught much of it this school year. So I started to break down this unit with some can-do goals or some student objectives for the day. And here were some of the main goals that I narrowed in on for this unit. So I can talk about authentic foods. I can give basic information about a restaurant. I can order food and give my opinion about a meal. I can ask and answer questions about food in restaurants. I can calculate the cost to prepare a traditional dish. And I can help a friend with his or her restaurant. Now I'm focusing in on the authentic foods right at the beginning because I found that this was the hardest part for me. I found that if I wanted students to talk about foods, I felt like I needed to pre-teach so much vocabulary, and they were really going to have to get into breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all the fruits, all the vegetables, all the meats. And I found that when I did it this way, they were learning a ton of vocabulary, but they weren't moving towards that novice high or intermediate low because they were just spreading themselves out too much. If I can narrow in on something authentic and something specific first, they're going to learn the vocab they need to talk about that topic, and they can learn some of that other food vocabulary later on. So let's get started. This is the first lesson that I have planned for this unit, and I can talk about authentic foods. I love to have a goal screen up on the board with some real pictures, some authentic looking materials for students, and have the goal in the target language for kids when they come in. I found a lot of my students wanted to try to figure out what we were going to be doing for the day. And when I started posting it up there, then they stopped asking me. They went and tried to figure it out first. Now, if you needed to, you could also start class just simply in English and say, this is the goal for the day. By the end of the class, you should be able to talk about some specific Hispanic foods. That will take about 20 seconds, and they're also seeing it in the target language, and then I think you can jump right back into your target language and stay there. For this lesson, I focused on number 1, empanadas. And this is something that's not translated literally back into English, so it's nice for students to learn about something that is popular in Hispanic culture and part of their cuisine that we don't necessarily have in American food. So the lesson's going to start with empanadas. I would show this picture and maybe just give them a little bit about empanadas. It's bread and it's delicious and there's different fillings, and they're going to maybe understand some of what you said. Maybe you give your opinion and tell them, in my opinion, these are amazing. They are the best. You guys are going to love this. Say, it is your option to decide whether you like them or don't like them. All students are going to get a form like this, that says it seems delicious and it seems terrible. And let them know there are many different options of empanadas. Your job today is when we talk about different empanadas, you need to put them on the right category. If you think it seems delicious, write the type of empanada on the left. If you think it seems terrible, you go ahead and write that type of empanada on the right. And then we're going to hit the authentic resource. So I found this article, and there are lots of similar articles like this out there, but it says it's 7 types of fillings for empanadas to give you a little variety in your food. Now, students may not be able to understand all of this, but I do think it's comprehensible. I think there's a lot they can pick out of this and a lot they can understand, but they might need a little help from their teacher as you're teaching this. So I would probably go through this with my students and tell them, like, summarize some of this main information and say there are lots of variations for empanadas. Let's look at some different types. And we're starting backwards on this list. So number 7 is this apple and cinnamon. And they may not know these words, but this is where you as a teacher can make things comprehensible. If you could bring in an apple and a little shaker of cinnamon, that would be really awesome to be able to actually give them a visual for what this is. Or you could draw it on the board and help them out a little bit with it. But start and talk a little bit about this fruity empanada and that it's sweet, and maybe have a little sugar there that shows that this would be a great dessert. But in the end, they're going to write down whether they think that apple and cinnamon empanada is something that seems delicious or something that seems terrible. You can go through these different empanadas, and the pictures really show quite a bit. But allow them to add this to their list. Pescado, they may not understand that this is fish right away, but you can again draw an example and point out things like the tuna and the salmon right here, and that might help them figure out pescado. I'm not expecting that they remember every single one of these ingredients. In general, I want them to walk away with this lesson of what an empanada is, and that there are lots of different fillings, and maybe they remember 1 or 2 different types of fillings that go in the empanadas. So this lesson goes on, talks about cheese and ham and cheese and onions and cheese and all these different variations. And in the end, it's going to give them a really good idea of what an empanada looks like and some different options for the empanada. The next part of this is arepas. And again, this is something that doesn't really exist in American cuisine, so this is going to be something new to them. But again, they're going to see a lot of variations. So I found this infographic that's talking about different types of arepas. It's starting off right at the top, letting us know where arepas are from and like kind of the background in Venezuela, and that there's so many different types. And this infographic kind of breaks down the different types of arepas. So here's these different really unique names, not always just explaining what's inside them. Like domino is not the ingredient, but it's just a name of a certain type of arepa. It's really visual, which I think is good. And it gets even better here at the bottom when it tells you what the ingredients are. A lot of these are cognates, so students are going to be able to pick out and figure out what things are. Other ones like cebolla is really great because it's obvious. The picture is right there and it really shows you what it is. Some of these students won't know, and they may want to look something up, and that's fine. And again, I don't expect them to remember everything, but I think just going through this infographic will help them figure some things out and help them see it in context. So what I would do with this is I would let students look at this for a few minutes and try to figure out some of the ingredients and some of the different types of arepas. And then I'm going to break down and ask them some questions. So maybe I ask them something like, what is the most simple arepa? Students could have whiteboards, and maybe they write out their opinion on the whiteboard. Or you could just ask this, have it as a small conversation. You could give it to them on a piece of paper and let them answer the questions on a piece of paper. The next question asking, what are the most interesting ingredients? And this is an opinion. Some students might think egg is a really interesting ingredient, or maybe they look something up and they think that mayonnaise is a really interesting thing to have on there. The seafood would be big for my students at PRP. They're not a big fan of seafood and they don't eat that a lot. The next question is asking, which one do you like the most? And which one do you not like at all? And this just allows the students to get used to some of these names, to look at some of these ingredients, and to kind of understand that there are lots of different types of arepas. Before they leave, I would ask the students, what is more delicious, the empanada or the arepa? And ask them to describe it a little bit, maybe give their opinion. At this point in the year, my students would have known really well how to say I like and I don't like. They would know the word because, it is. So again, they already have so much they can use to help them with this lesson. But what's nice is the new part is the cultural food, and the new part is some of the ingredients and the names of these different foods or things. But I believe at even just the end of one lesson, students are going to be able to talk about either an empanada or an arepa and sort of give their opinion and explain why they like it or why they don't. Now, this is really easy to switch to another language, but for French, I would do the same lesson, but just switch out the empanada and arepa for two types of pastries. Or the cheeses. I worked with a French teacher just recently, and she said she was going to make something like this and really just focus on French cheeses and the hard versus the soft cheeses. And this first lesson would have been all about that. Chinese, you can look at dumplings. The German, you can find two different foods that are popular for different meals or for snacks. Latin, you can even get in some ancient foods like the porridge or the different types of meats that were popular. And again, I think these are the kind of conversations you can have during your PLC, and you can sit down and say, we're all going to teach this unit. How can we personalize this for our target culture and still teach something similar? So that's the first lesson. It gets into a lot of that cultural connections and exposes them to some types of foods. So moving on to the next lesson, I can give basic information about a restaurant. I like to start class with some sort of like a open-ended question just to allow a little bit of conversation and to sort of lead into some of the things we're going to be talking about through the day. So this was a simple kind of what's the most important part of a restaurant? Is it the service, the price, or the food? And explain. Some days I would have not as much participation, and students might answer, but they really don't have a lot to say yet, and that's okay. This is sort of prepping them for what's to come. Other days, I would have students get really passionate about a certain question and kind of get a debate started in class. And I found that if students want to talk, if they want to communicate about something, then I'm not going to stop them. If this went on for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I'm going to let it happen, because that is the purpose of our class, is to get our students communicating. And if they're excited and they're passionate about something and they want to use the target language, I'm definitely going to let them do that. After our warm-up question, that's open-ended, and again, you may want to have students write this to give them a little time to think about their answer and what they would say, or let them talk it out with a partner, let them talk it out in small groups, and then maybe you come together as a whole class and you get a couple different ideas as a whole class. Okay, again, the goal was to give information about a restaurant. So one of my favorite places to go for information about a restaurant is Yelp. And this is a website, or it is an app too. And you can use the Yelp app to find reviews and information about restaurants from all over the world. So if there's a map, or you can kind of pick your area. If you want to find a restaurant in Madrid, Spain, then you can put in Madrid and let them know like what you're looking for, what type of restaurant or what type of food, and it will find reviews for you. I would actually show this in class to my students. This is just a quick explanation of like what Yelp is, and let them sort of figure out what it is before you actually show them the restaurant information. So letting them know like this is a great way to find different local places, restaurants, if you're looking for the most delicious restaurant in your city or the best doctor, what can you discover about your neighborhood? And so this kind of sets this up. For my students, I want them to find information about restaurants, but I'm going to have them categorize some of the information. This also allows me to let them use vocabulary that they already know and add to that. This is almost like them making their own vocab list that's going to help them later on to talk about these restaurants later on. So here are the 4 different categories that I have set up. I have type of restaurant or type of food, other information that's important, and students can pick out all kinds of stuff for this. Phrases, positive or negative descriptions or phrases, and letting them kind of pick out some words that they feel like are positive or negative that would help them talk about a restaurant or a food. So then I'm going to show them basically a review of a restaurant. This is a place in Argentina, it looks like. I can't remember. But of course, it's going to focus on the foods that we talked about yesterday. So this place is like well known for empanadas, and I want students to recognize that, to say, oh my gosh, we just learned about empanadas yesterday, and this is a place that actually sells them. I like to let students go through this and pick out some of the information. So again, they're looking for types of restaurants, positive or negative descriptions or phrases, and any other important information. And my students will start to add things on their own. So they'll say, okay, we look that the category of food is this Argentinian kitchen, and they can write that down. They might start looking over here and find more information and start to say, is this good for groups? Yes. My students would pick that out right away. Accepts reservations? No. Does it have a patio? No. It's informal. They might start picking out some of this information about a restaurant, and that's really good. And now the fun part. These are the reviews. So I just picked out a few reviews that I thought my students would be able to get some good information about the restaurant. So here they're going to start to add like excellent and beautiful and good prices and delicious pizzas. They're going to start to add some of that positive information here on the chart for positive phrases or descriptions. I would hope that they started picking out things like the location, the service, the atmosphere, and some of those words that they definitely didn't know before this unit. Here in the second review, they might see things like traditional. They might pick out like the typical dish. They might find that the empanadas are delicious and enormous. So again, this is just allowing them to see what they understand. I don't expect them to understand every word, but I think they can figure out some positive or some negative phrases that help them talk about a restaurant. So after they do the first one together, I would go back to this, put this on the whiteboard, and let students give me some examples of things they found. And we'd almost add it to make a class list, so that if one student missed it or they weren't sure what that word was, maybe now they're going to see it and say, oh, that was a positive thing. So I would show them another one. Here's now a place that's focused in more on the arepas. And they're going to pick out maybe some more categories of food, the Caribbean. They might find some other information over here that they missed the first time. And then check out some more reviews. If you notice students were missing a lot of this, you might want to pull some of these words out and help them with it. Maybe they missed pequeño. And this is kind of interesting. Is pequeño, would small be a positive or a negative word? That's maybe depending on your opinion, but that's a good question to talk out in class. Is that a positive or a negative thing? Here, I would say it's probably a negative thing, right? After they have gone through these 2 reviews together as a class, then I'm going to say it's your turn now. And your job is to find a restaurant that serves some of our traditional dishes that we talked about with empanadas or arepas, and read some of the reviews. And give them some time to do just that. Students really love to have a choice and a voice. And I think when you're allowed to tell them, you can look in any country, any Spanish speaking country you want. Some are going to go straight to Spain or to Cuba or to Mexico, and allow them to kind of play around on the app and find a city there, find a restaurant that serves these, and look at the menu, look at some of the information. They may have to read 3 or 4 reviews before they really can understand one, and that's okay too. That's allowing them to have some of that ownership in what they're learning. I put on here as a task before leaving, record a video talking about a restaurant and tell me a little bit about it. I like to give my students in general some things that I want them to try to include. And if they want to give more, they can. My students were well groomed to say, we know that anything we do needs to be at our proficiency level. And our proficiency level is a novice high or intermediate low. So my students that were a little more advanced knew they were trying to aim towards that intermediate low. My other students knew we're shooting for this novice high. But again, like having them record a video or write open-ended, what do you know about this restaurant? You tell me. And a lot of times students really could start to put things in their own words. And they may make mistakes, but that's something I can start to clean up in the next lesson. So I would have them talk about the name of the restaurant, the place where it's located, the type of foods that are served there. Are the reviews more positive or negative? And maybe summarizing some of those reviews. This one's probably the toughest part on there, but maybe you can teach your students a word or a phrase that says, the reviews say, or most of the reviews say, and if you can give them that chunk of language, they can usually fill in the rest and do a really good job. Now, if this were other languages, again, it's pretty easy to switch over to the different culture and say, French, here's a cheese restaurant or the fromagerie. The German, here's a great restaurant in Frankfurt. I couldn't find any in China when I switched things over, and I'm not sure if this site is blocked there, but I did find a lot of big cities in the US or around the world that have large Chinese populations that there were a lot of reviews, and you could switch it right to the target language. And on all these, the French is actually a review in French, the German is a review in German, and again, there's Chinese reviews on there too, which I was surprised I could actually figure out some of the different symbols and things that were listed on there just because of being familiar with Yelp a little bit and because there's a lot of visuals on there. So in general, that's the day 2. Now they've learned a little bit about a cultural food and they've looked at a restaurant that serves that cultural food, and then we'll move on. Next is ordering food and giving their opinion about it. So I just wanted to find a way, like a formula almost, to teach my students how to order, because there's a general formula and every person might do it a little bit different, but in general, this works for students and I wanted to make it easy for them. So I put together putting together the phrase of, I want 2 tacos that are chicken, and please put that in there because that's easy to forget for our students. I put an example below. So, quiero 2 tacos de carne, por favor. And then I'm going to see if my students can figure out how to do that themselves. So I'm going to put a picture up and let them see if they can order what's in this picture. So again, they're going to have to go through and count this and then tell me, all right, 11. And then tell me I want 11 empanadas, and they could put in their own ingredient. I want 11 beef empanadas, please. And you could show a few different pictures, but something that challenges them to talk about a cultural food too. I found our students are most likely going to order actual Hispanic foods like tacos and empanadas and arepas and paella instead of ordering like chicken fingers or a hamburger, because most likely they're going to be able to do that in English if they ever go to a restaurant. But it's when it's this specific types of Hispanic food that they're going to actually need to do it in the target language. So I might show a few more pictures of foods and let them do that. But where it really becomes real is when students are actually ordering food that they're going to eat. So this is where I would encourage you all to find some type of traditional food that you've been talking about earlier in class and bring them in. I know that Havana Rumba has got some great food for Spanish classes. The empanadas are excellent. There's a new restaurant, I think it's in Shelbyville, and it's this Nalia's, and they have a great arepas. It's a Venezuelan restaurant. For French teachers, you may bring in king's cake or bring in some different pastries. But if you can bring in 2 different options of food, then students have a purpose for ordering in the target language. If you have empanadas and one is chicken and one is just vegetables, then they can say, okay, I want the chicken empanada. And they actually have a reason to tell you which one they would like and a reason to do it in the target language. In fact, if I brought in food, I would also even see if I could get a guest speaker to come with them so they weren't ordering from me, but they were actually talking to a native speaker. That would be really great. Yeah. So then after they have a chance to order their food and to eat their food, then I'm going to give them a real Yelp review. This is exactly from the site. It's in the target language, like I said, when you have an account on it and you pick the certain language that you want. And this is a review that's on there that people can actually fill out. And you start with the star ratings. So I love that students can kind of look at the different stars and what that means. Like, yes, I'm a fan. Wow, it's awesome. I've had better experiences. And so again, students can go through and mark how many stars they think that food they got to try was and explain what they think about the food. Tell you a little bit about their experience and the good service or the bad service in their class. But in general, they get a chance to actually review a food that they actually got to try. I know it's a lot to have to get food and bring it in, but if you can do it, it becomes so much more exciting. And who knows, maybe you have students in your class that love to cook or prepare food, and maybe students can all divide up and bring in some different ingredients or bring in some different types of empanadas, and then you all as a class get to try them. Again, pretty easy to switch to another language. Just focus on a different type of food, the cheeses or the dumplings or whatever it may be, and allow them to practice and then eat it. Excuse me. All right. Next is I can ask and answer questions about food and restaurants. And this is something novices really have to work on. After our training about proficiency, we had learned that novices are really good at answering questions, and they can also ask some memorized questions, but they really struggle to create their own questions. But intermediates are going to start to be able to do this. So if your students are breaking into that intermediate low, they need to start getting some practice asking and answering different questions, and maybe even coming up with their own questions. So here's the lesson that supports it. I like to do this every unit, is have a day that's focused on asking and answering questions about the topic. And here I'm going to start where they can read the questions and just talk about it. I really try to work on doing open-ended questions, and I learned a lot about that with Greg Duncan and some of his PDs. But if we ask a student a closed-ended question, their proficiency is going to be really low in the answer. So it's this idea of, if I ask a student, do you like French fries? They may answer yes, and that's a normal answer. They might not answer in a complete sentence, yes, I love French fries, because that's kind of awkward. We don't always do that in real life. But if I say something like, explain to me your favorite food, then all of a sudden they have to say more than one word. They're not going to say, or describe your favorite food. They're not going to say French fries. To describe it, they might say, oh, I like warm French fries with lots of salt. My favorite kind is from Burger King, and explain some of those things. So again, try to make these questions open-ended, but here are a few that I just put together as examples. What's your opinion about the food in the cafeteria? Defend your opinion with 3 reasons. What restaurant has the best hamburgers? Describe them. What's the best restaurant in Louisville, and why do you like it? What do you like more, empanadas or arepas? Which restaurant does not have good service? Explain. What do you prefer, eating at home or eating out in a restaurant, and why? And this is like the life story of most of my students. You are really hungry and you only have $5. Where are you going to eat, and what are you going to order? And that's something my students really like to get into. Now, you can use these questions in a lot of different ways. You can set students up like speed dating, or kind of like hot seats, I guess is what we call them, where students are set up in groups of 2 and they get a chance to just look at the question together, and then they both have a chance to answer it. I found this was the most low pressure way to do speaking in class, because they don't have to speak in front of a huge group. They're not in front of the whole class, and all students get an opportunity to talk. If I'm in front of the class and I'm just asking one or two students, what are the rest of the kids doing? They're really just sitting there and they're probably not paying attention. But here I found that students were so much more active and involved when it was in a small group, because they actually had to participate. They had to join in. Another way you could do this is to set it up in small groups. And I like to do this by the end of level 1. I found that a small group, they could handle it a little bit better, but in groups of maybe 3 or 4, and let the students kind of talk through this. And there's more opinions for them to hear. So if they didn't really know how to answer it, they may learn something new when they listen to a friend answer it. Okay, and this is where it gets a little more exciting. Now, students have seen questions like these throughout class, and they've had a chance to practice with probably non-native speakers that are also in their class. But where it becomes more exciting is when you can actually give them a real audience. I found that we had a lot of native speakers at PRP, and I found that if I asked them to come to class, very few of them wanted to come if they had to get up and speak in front of the entire class. But if I asked them to come and just talk to my students in small groups, they were all willing to do it. So on the left-hand side here, you see 3 of our students. One was from Peru, one was from Mexico, and one was from Cuba. And I set them up in small groups in the hallway and let my students go out in groups of 2 or 3 and talk to the native speaker about food. And I let them they could use some of the questions that they just saw in class, or they could come up with some of their own questions. But I would set a timer, and they got 5 minutes to kind of talk and interview and just like have a chance to have a conversation about food with a native speaker. And then when they come into class, most of them would say, "Oh, how do you say?" And they would ask me some different words, and I would challenge them to go look it up and figure out those words that they needed. And then what was neat is they got to do it again. And later, my students would usually tell me the first time I was really nervous. The first time I had to go out there in that conversation, it was really scary. But the second time, it was a little bit easier. And if they did get a chance to do a third time, they said it was even easier yet. So again, practice makes perfect. All right. Second to the last one, I can calculate the cost to prepare a traditional dish. I'm going to prep them with the question, and hopefully they don't know the answer. That's the goal. But what costs more, eating at home or eating out? And I think the real answer is it depends, but it's fun to watch students kind of process that and give their opinion and maybe go back and forth about it. But step 1 to this lesson is now going to say, find a recipe for either an empanada or an arepa, something that looks good to you. Before I send my students out to do this, though, I'm going to show them an example of what I'm looking for in class. So I found this recipe for pineapple empanadas. I like the sweet stuff, so this was good for me. And it's got the different ingredients. It's got a review. It tells how long these are going to take. It's got things like how many servings are there. And again, all the different ingredients. What we're going to do with this recipe later on is we're going to now look these ingredients up at the grocery store. So this would be step 2 that they're going to do, is go to one of these grocery stores from whatever country you picked. If yesterday you looked at a restaurant in Argentina where you found empanadas at a restaurant in Argentina, then I'm going to say let's go to a grocery store in Argentina and look at the prices of what things actually cost there. So for me, what I did is I looked up the prices for the pineapple empanadas. I wrote down my different ingredients that I'm going to need and went to a grocery store and looked at what the prices were. What's nice about a lot of these grocery stores these days are they have the online shopping option. So I could look up flour, and even if I didn't know what this word meant, like most of our students won't, all I had to do is type it in the search bar and pictures pop up immediately of what this is. I think for our students, they would not have to translate anything first. You're teaching them to figure it out in context. So as I type in the word for flour, these pop up, and I think students would be able to say, oh, I think this is flour. And what's nice is as soon as they're ready, if they say, oh, this is the cheapest option over here, I'm going to add it to cart. And eventually they can look up all the different ingredients, add it right to the cart, and the cart's going to total things for them. So it's kind of a neat way. It's like a online kind of web quest, but it's allowing them to see and use this in the target language in context. So the next step is going to be now compare the price per serving with the same product in the restaurant. So maybe I would go back to that restaurant from yesterday and look up how much did pineapple empanadas cost and how much are they per serving and how much did mine end up costing per serving, and compare what's the best price. Now this is where students may need a little bit of a language lesson, and they may need to write down like a formula for a simple equation to say blank is more expensive than blank. Like eating out is more expensive than preparing the food at home. And they may need to see like that example, this more than, less than comparison. But this is a perfect time for you to model it for them and then send them off to do it on their own. So now they're going to go through the steps and they're going to find their own recipe. They're going to find a grocery store and look up the prices of all their different ingredients. Do a little bit of math where they're adding up the totals of all the ingredients and dividing it by how many portions there are and figuring out the best price. This math side is going to be a little challenge for some of our students, but other students that are really strong in math are going to love this. And for them, it's going to be a much more natural way for them to use the language, because if you're a math mind, you're probably stronger at math than you are at language and writing and words, but it allows different strengths to shine a little bit in class. All right, and the last lesson is just going to be a way to put some of these different things together and to talk a little bit. Here's a video I found that kind of kicks off this food truck side of restaurants, and here it is.
Este 9 y 10 de julio, por primera vez en Paraná, Festival Argentino de Food Trucks. Más de 20 camiones con la mejor comida de distintas regiones del país. Cocina gourmet y cocina tradicional. Venía a disfrutar de la nueva tendencia mundial. Shows en vivo, bandas invitadas, juegos y mucho más. Festival Argentino de Food Trucks. La entrada incluye una consumición.
Okay, so moving on, here's where I would give my kids a little scenario and allow them to kind of put some things in action. So here I typed in something like, a friend of yours has a food truck with typical Hispanic food. He needs your help to grab the attention of some new clients. So with some pictures, describe the foods that this person offers and explain to people why they should visit the food truck. And I love to do this in class, a scenario like this that's a little bit on the spot, but I love to do it with a pecha kucha. If you've never heard of this, you're going to love it. But a pecha kucha is actually the Japanese word for chit chat. And this started where Japanese architects were getting really tired of listening to other business people come in and read off a PowerPoint. Can you relate? I can. As a teacher, I remembered students just reading off the PowerPoint, and it was so boring, and you had to listen to a whole class full of it, and it was terrible. And really, true proficiency is looking at what can your students do on the spot. Not what can they read or what can they memorize, but what can they actually do just on the fly. So pecha kucha kind of like grabs that a little bit. A traditional pecha kucha is 20 slides, 20 seconds each. So that would be 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Now I know my novice students cannot get in front of the class and speak for 6 minutes and 40 seconds, but they could do a smaller amount. So I found a good starting point was showing 5 pictures or 5 slides, no words on the slides, no help there, but 5 slides, 20 seconds each, and that was 1 minute and 40 seconds. And I found that students could do that. At first, it seemed crazy, but they had no problem with it once they got going. So what we would do in class is we would do a little practice pecha kucha and say, all right, remember, here's your scenario. Your friend of yours has a food truck. It's your best friend, really good friend. You're going to help them find some new Hispanic clients. So walk around, find some people, and then describe his food truck or describe your friend in the restaurant with some of these pictures. So you could pick one student to be an example to do this in front of the class, or you could let students do this with a partner, but this is basically a practice pechacucha. And here's what you would do is you'd start the timer on your phone, pull up the first picture, and give them 20 seconds to talk. Now, what happens on the first one is a lot of this. Because they're not sure what to say. It's getting them to think on the spot, and that's tricky. But some students might be able to say something like, my friend has a restaurant. It is delicious. And that's okay. That's an okay start. Go to the next one and see what students can say. See what they can think on the spot. They might say, this is my friend. She's from Argentina. She likes to make empanadas. She's 28 years old and she is very talented. This is going to make them think. What do they say about this? How does this connect back to the scenario? But they might say something like, restaurants are boring. A food truck is so much more interesting. Why would you go to a restaurant? It's very expensive. The service is slow. Come to the food truck. It's fast and friendly. My friend makes empanadas. The empanadas are delicious. There are many different types of empanadas. There are chicken, there are beef, there are cheese. They even have sweet empanadas like pineapple or mango. And again, you're going to give them 20 seconds per picture. Let them say what they want. Okay. So what's great about the learning experience with the pechacucha is the first time they do it, it's not good. It is terrible. But then you can stop and ask students, what do you wish you knew how to say? If you were going to do this again, what would you need? And students usually need transitions. They usually need something to introduce or kind of like that topic sentence. And so you might teach them, this is a food truck. Or so those phrases like this is, or I want to tell you about blank. And if you can help them with some of those phrases or give them some time to look some things up, that's really powerful. My kids wanted to know transitions like, also, let me introduce you to, or next, second. A lot of times they needed those little transition words or phrases to help them out. And this was a perfect reason to learn them. So after you've done it once, I would go through and do the exact same one again and see if they were a little better at it. That's the whole idea of a practice pechacucha. Let them practice. See what they can do. Then what you're going to do is you're going to let them know that, hey, we're going to do this pechacucha again, but this time you can choose your own pictures. You can kind of plan out what you want to say, and then it's basically a presentational speaking task. You could have them in small groups and maybe have someone record them with a camera, or you could do it just to share out in front of a small group. If you had small classes, I would do this in front of the whole class where they got to see each other's. And the beauty of it is every student is speaking for 1 minute and 40 seconds, but it doesn't go on and on forever, and you're not watching a student read off a PowerPoint. So that kind of wraps things up. Again, this is just getting started. It may not be a full month's worth of lesson plans, but this gets you through a good maybe a week and a half to, what do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, maybe a week and a half, and with an assessment at the end, a little bit longer. You may want to add in another little mini unit that's looking at the differences between breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and tie it back to what the student likes to eat. But in general, my goal is just to be able to give you some ideas of how to stay in the target language, how to push students to reach their target proficiency and get to that novice high or intermediate low on this topic, and some ways to use some authentic resources and pull in that culture a little bit. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks a lot for watching this. Again, I hope you can take something and be able to apply it to your classroom. If you have any questions, we'll leave you with our email address. If you want to ask Kara or me anything, then we'll be there and we can help you with it. But good luck with this unit. Have fun with it, because I think that's best too, is if you enjoy what you're teaching, the students are going to like it a little more too. So good luck and hope you have a great day. Bye.